And we're live with our 244th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law, also on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Absolute AppSec. Super excited to be here today. We've got Kyle Kelly that's joining us. We'll get into his background here shortly and what he's going to, tell us about. As far as upcoming events and other things that are going on, thanks to everyone that attended our event, happy hour, happy hour, whatever you wanted to call it at RSA. It was great to see a whole bunch of people there. Very successful during the crazy week that is RSA and B-side San Francisco and everything else that goes on in San Francisco during that time in the security space. So thanks for coming. A lot of good conversations. There's going to be a couple other guests that come on based on the conversations that we had there. But yeah, a lot of listeners, right? I think Larry, I'm trying to remember who else was there, Ken. Now it's been like a week and a half, so I can't remember everything. But
Oh yeah, we had a lot of people there. Man, Larry was there. Jerry actually Jerry didn't make it out. But that's a different and that was unfortunate for him. We had Jimmy Mesta came out. We had Joaquin came out. I mean, they're just if I was to sit here and go through it, the list would be a long list. It was a lot of good folks came out.
Yep, it was a good time. So that being said, we will host another event during DEF CON Black Hat at some point, just like we did last year. It's a good way to get listeners out and to meet people. So if you're going to be there, watch this space, I guess. Join Slack. We will notify people once we have signups and everything else available for that. And with the move at DEF CON, I don't even know where it's going to be this year, so we'll figure that out. That's we're still in planning phases there. But if you are going to be at DEF CON and you haven't yet attended the course, or you're looking for an opportunity to look at practical secure code review, we will be conducting the training at DEF CON. Again, these are the 2 days after DEF CON, so take that in advisement. For Ken and I, it's a long, week in Vegas, but you will have to take that into account if you are going to attend. That you have to stay after the conference and brave the strip for another 2 days, I guess. But that being said, we just had a really successful training again with the new generative AI bits, and are really excited with how it actually helps our process from a secure code review perspective. Those bits will be included here in the DEF CON training. So if you're looking to get more familiar with how to use generative AI to enhance that process, consider us.
I just say that the thing that made me the happiest was us walking away from that course and the AppSec manager being like, "Yeah, we're okay. I need access to an LLM. I need a server. I need a knowledge base built by my folks." Like, we made a believer. They're like, "Oh my god, this really is powerful." It's like, yeah, I've been trying to say that. It is.
Yeah. We've been talking about that for a while. So, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about a generative AI and software, the security supply chain right here in just a minute, right? Outside of that, we do have one other sponsorship today. This one's new for us. We're going to be, Diana Initiative is actually sponsoring us. That is during Hackers Summer Camp, as they call it, Black Hat and DEF CON. But just wanted to give a shout out to them. Diana Initiative is a one-day information security conference committed to helping those underrepresented in information security. It is happening Monday, August 5th, 2024 in Las Vegas at the start of Hacker Summer Camp. The event features multiple speaker tracks, workshops, a capture the flag competition, and villages with hands-on learning. Visit dianainitiative.org for more information. You can get your tickets today with early bird pricing or student discounts. They're also seeking student scholarship sponsors and event sponsors. So check out Diana Initiative. That's a good group of people that are conducting that conference. It runs kind of in conjunction with, B-Sides and Black Hat. Again, take that into account when you're trying to schedule your event this summer. Ken, I think that's everything on my list for today. Anything else you want to call out there before we
No, just
start grilling Kyle on all things? Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah, I would just say that this was my first year ever going to B-Sides SF, and it was really freaking cool. I thought
Mhm.
the talks were really good. It was in an AMC theater, which was interesting, and also what a place to see talks at. I mean, you got a recliner lazy boy with cup holders in a very comfortable setting. I've never sat and watched a talk in a more comfortable setting other than maybe at my own couch. So I guess I lost Seth on that one, but I really enjoyed it. They had some good talks. Shout out to some of the former guests that have been on the show, like Jivan, uh, uh, Jacob, yeah, a bunch of folks who put on a pretty awesome panel and talks and whatnot. Anyways, just the talks were great. The venue was great. I will definitely be making B-Sides SF a priority every year from now on. I know I'm super late to the party on that, but I'm aware of it. But anyways, all right, that's all I have. Let's
Cool.
talk about let's shift gears. Do you want to
Yes, let's
introduce
shift
Kyle
gears.
to that?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Yeah, I've got to take care of something really quick. So just go for it and I'll be right back.
No worries. By the way, I hope it's not with Seth what has happened before. Like one time we were on here and his basement just started leaking, or something in his basement just started leaking, like a pipe or something, and exploded, and he had to like, yeah, we were mid like streaming. In any case, Kyle, welcome to the show. Kyle, I'm going to talk about you just for a second. So Kyle works currently at SemGroup as a researcher I want to say in the SCA space. Is that accurate to say? Okay.
Yep.
And then Cram Hacks. I actually want to dig in on Cram Hacks a bit. So you're the creator of Cram Hacks, and just all around AppSec Pro. It sounds like so, or it kind of sounds like you, all around AppSec Pro is what I'm trying to say. With that having been said, welcome to the show, Kyle. We're about to dig in on your history and what you do day to day.
Well, that's terrifying. And sounds like an AppSec Pro is probably more reasonable. I specialize in finding the nuanced issues that people who don't dig deep really fully understand. And so that people think I'm a professional just because I find all the little issues that is blasted all over social media and complain about them. So I'm really just a professional complainer at the end of the day. And so,
That's
yeah.
That's a good way to describe it, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that describes a lot of security professionals in general, right? Like as we go in and we complain about, hey, you did this wrong. I can do this, right? You need to go fix this. But yeah. On the flip side, it feels like that's the only way we get a lot of stuff done because we have to get other people involved. So, yeah. Anyway.
Especially on podcasts, webinars, presentations, I've been doing a lot of, and at first I was just terrified because I'm usually one of the harshest critics, and so I'm sure if I listen back to my own speaking, I would rip myself apart. So to anybody out there who I've maybe ranted about on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., don't take it personal.
Yeah. After you do it for a while too, right? Like Ken and I were talking about this. I don't go back and listen to a lot of episodes because I find I just criticize myself the entire time, right? Like, oh wow, Ken sounded really great, but Seth, man, yeah. Anyway, that's the whole imposter syndrome, right? Like, that is a pretty common feeling. But that being said, right? So Cram Hacks, is that where you that's your newsletter? Is that what it is?
Yep. So Cram Hacks, really, I created it after speaking with Clint Gibbler at SemGroup, who obviously runs TLDRSec, super successful newsletter. And, he gave me a lot of career advice on, just kind of figuring out what makes me happy, what keeps me excited about cybersecurity. And eventually it was kind of an epiphany. And I just realized, I don't really love doing the actual work that I do. I love the learning that I get from the work I do. And so, he was talking about his newsletter and how it kind of forces or encourages him to learn on a weekly basis and learn new things, not just stuff that's already been discovered. And so that kind of kickstarted things. And I've been running with Crime Hacks every Wednesday. Haven't missed a week yet. Pretty religious about it. As soon as I miss a week, it's just going to start storming fireballs for sure. And so, yeah, at first it was strictly software supply chain security. Then I branched out into other areas of cybersecurity. But now I'm actually back focused on software supply chain security because I've recognized the niche has grown substantially in just the last few months. And, when I first started it, I felt like there wasn't enough content. Now I feel like there's too much content. And so happy to finally feel like I specialize in something, because my whole life I've been a very big generalist.
Okay, cool. So what is it specifically about? Well, okay. Maybe we go through background first. I'm jumping into software supply chain security
because that's a big topic. Want to get there too. But yes.
Yes. But let's talk a little bit about your background first, right? Like what led you to. I mean, it sounds like you've talked with Clint on his newsletter, which was obviously all of us follow it and use it, right? Like it's a good source for us for like links as well. We've had him on the podcast before. Great guy.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, he was actually in our first practical secure code review course at the time. That was kind of a fun thing. But let's talk about you, Kyle. Like, how did you get into security? What led you to, software supply chain security, and just, kind of overall what your background is. And then we can dig into the fun stuff after that.
Yeah, sure thing. So I started, I think, like many security professionals, in video games. Mild obsession or extreme obsession. For most of my childhood. So my mom she gave birth to me when she was 19, turning 20. So she was working a lot when I was really young. And I was lucky enough to get a computer when I was roughly 4 years old. It was really for her, but obviously I inherited it. And because she was a younger mom, she had a dedicated dial-up line, which was not super common those days. And so I was a 4-year-old with a computer that I mostly had access to and a dedicated dial-up line. So that quickly turned into playing RuneScape by the age of 6, which is a MMO RPG. And that was pretty much my life for, you never actually quit RuneScape. So I don't want to say I stopped playing entirely. I'm sure I'll sign back in at some point in the next few months. But yeah, so that led to cybersecurity really because as I got older, people wanted to play more video games, Call of Duty, Halo, etc. And I just didn't have time for it because I wanted to be so good at RuneScape. So that quickly led into bot development, or at least using bots initially, and then eventually bot development. So it's how can I be competitive at all these things that all take countless hours out of your life? In order to be competitive, you really have to play RuneScape hours and hours per day. Unless you have a bot. So that was my entryway into more like development / cybersecurity. I remember Miniclip games. There was like a snowball fight game that you could use Cheat Engine with and throw a bajillion snowballs at people. Mm-hmm. So yeah, all those little things, just like how can I achieve something without having to put all the work in? What is the easy shortcut? And I kind of look at life the same way. It's I'm very frugal, very into investing, and just like understanding that my money now will be a heck of a lot more valuable if I put it away now versus what I make in 10 years. So like $1 today is a lot more valuable than $1 in 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just looking for those. I don't want to call them easy because they could be really tough, but I like the kind of like I'm okay with not eating the Tootsie Roll today if it means I'll get 2 tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say it is easier in the long run. It's hard, maybe like, well, that's the thing with discipline, right? It's always harder in the short term, but it makes everything else in your life easier in the long run.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's kind of that, like the mentality that you've got there, right? Like, a lot of people that we talk to in the industry seem to have this, well, I try to explain it to people like that are outside of the industry that it's really like about solving puzzles and then figuring out how to automate the solving of those puzzles, right? Yes, like, oh, it sounds cool to hack something, but there's a lot of like little pieces and understanding that goes into it. And that's really what it is you're pulling apart, right? Okay, how do I do this with Cheat Engine or with something else? And there's a lot of, collaboration that goes on online with other people and other tools. And it's that, I don't know. For me, it's almost like that dopamine hit, right? You love that little dopamine hit when you figure something out that drives it all, right? So it's, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and just classic, like taking everything apart. I remember I probably got like 2 or 3 drum kits throughout my life, and I took apart every single one. And I never played the drums or even really cared to learn how to play the drums, but I love taking it apart for some reason.
Nice, sweet, cool. Okay, so you got there. You're automating things. You're into development. What led you down the security path as opposed to just like strict development or something else?
I mean, it sounds cool. Why not? Why not break things? It's a lot
Uh-huh.
easier to break things than it is to fix them, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Especially, I was really glad when um, so my first position as a consultant. It's so nice handing over the report and realizing you don't have to do any of that work. That is like the best feeling ever. I was on the other side, through internships and part-time jobs throughout my undergrad. But even then, I was just really fortunate to have managers and leaders who didn't really silo me into any specific task. There were certain projects that had to get done throughout the summer, but for the most part, they just said, "Oh, like, are you interested in this book? Let's buy it, and you can read it in your free time. And if you have any questions about it, ping me. Oh, you want to do offensive security? Spend 20% of your time doing hack the box or
Hmm.
whatever."
Cool. I mean, that's always like, yeah, having support from your management or or whoever it is to actually go out and explore those things is invaluable. Especially in internships and other places, right? Like I always try to encourage people to do that. And I know Ken does as well, right? Like when we talk to, anyone in the industry, you got to figure out what it is that speaks to you, right? Cool.
In the
So
field.
yeah.
That just
Uh,
kind of reminded me. I had a high school teacher. We had one college course that was technology related in my high school, and it was a Cisco CCNA course.
mhm.
And the teacher of that course also apparently had an interest in cybersecurity, even though he didn't teach it. And I just remember sleeping like every day in class, unless he was talking about cybersecurity. Like he would talk about Wi-Fi pineapples and all the little gadgets, the rubber ducky, and I would just take all the money I earned from working at a paintball field and bought a Wi-Fi pineapple and would bring it to school and try not to get arrested. But yeah, that I guess just naturally, I recognize that I'm most excited when I'm learning things that I shouldn't be doing, and I would prefer to do them in a legal way.
It's weird. I've been having this conversation with my son because for whatever I guess he's well into middle school now, and for whatever reason, he's thinking already about like, what am I gonna do for a living? Like he just seemed preoccupied about the money part of it. And I was trying to explain to him, I was like, I don't obviously painting with broad strokes here, but generally speaking, I feel like what I've seen anyways is it doesn't really it's kind of like whatever the field is, as long as you really like it, and I mean really, really love it, what you do, you're probably gonna rise. I mean, again, not the case for everybody, but generally speaking, you're probably gonna do pretty well and be pretty successful. And the top, say 10 or 5% of people in their field tend to, it doesn't matter if it's like not for the other 90 or 95% of people a super high paying job or anything like that, but um, in the sense that it does that affect you? You're going to be successful probably regardless, right? Depending, it again. I'm trying to put a lot of caveats in here, but I'll just summarize it and take the caveats out and say, if you're like the top 5 to 10% in whatever thing you do, you're going to be okay. The money will follow. And that's basically what I've been trying to explain to him is like, that's life. That's kind of how it works. You want to be good at something, enjoy it. I think that's very true for me. On to your what you just said with the CCNA, that's how I got into IT to begin with. It was network engineering. I got my CCNA. I was working towards CCNP when I got asked, hey, like this thing that you love to do on your in your free time, do you want to do that for a job? Because now that's like a thing. And anyways, I guess my point is like I'm all about that. Follow your passions. Money will come, career will come, but just do what you really, really love within reason, right?
Yeah. I actually almost
stop on a soapbox.
I almost didn't pursue cybersecurity because of the it was right about when cybersecurity was transitioning to be like where all the money is. And so when I was applying to schools, well, first off, very few schools had a cybersecurity program. And secondly, if you just Googled like the median salary, it was significantly less than a software developer or a computer engineer. And so I actually went to school for computer engineering. But luckily, through internships and part-time jobs, I was working as a junior system administrator, a junior network administrator, and then a security analyst. So that kind of set me up, I think, for a perfect cybersecurity career.
Cool.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, and I think, Kyle, the way that things are going, right? Like, from a discipline perspective, and to Ken's point as well, right? Like I feel like you stay disciplined, you keep at it, right? Like, things, good things happen over time. You show up on a daily basis and good things happen. There's a lot of that flash in the pan, especially like you were saying, right? Like, oh, cybersecurity is paying a whole bunch of money. We get this huge influx, and then people don't realize it's still hard, right? Like it's anything, if you don't really love it, you're only in it for the money. It becomes a slog like any other job that's out there, right? Doesn't mean that people like that don't love it can't be successful in it. It just means that they're probably not as happy as somebody that has found their passion. But,
yeah, cool. And you're doing something smart too, Kyle, which is you took advice that was given to you and you followed through on that, and that's actually one of the more frustrating parts about being a mentor in this industry, in any industry, but like for sure, Seth and I we talked about this where it's like, not like, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but we've definitely talked about it in private, where it's like, there are people who are gung ho for the moment and you give them all this advice because they asked for it and they just do nothing with it. Nothing at all, and you're like, all right, well, and then you do that over and over again. You get used to it, but it doesn't hurt any less, right? It stinks when you offer people advice and they don't take it. So, anyways, following through, networking with people, following through on the advice that they give you and your reputation. Those are the things I feel like will set you up for success, because your reputation is everything and especially in a small industry like this,
When people ask me, I guess what's the biggest thing I've done to be successful, not that I typically run around saying I'm successful, but I think that experience is really important, but you don't necessarily need to live it yourself. It's kind of like what you hope for your kids. Like you hope that they don't have to learn the mistakes the hard way. Like, listen to me, I've been through this. Just please trust that this is what you should be doing. And then you have to understand that oftentimes they're just going to learn the hard way regardless. And I don't even have kids, but I'm trying to get mentally ready for it.
That's you're not wrong, man. That's well, Seth has 3 kids, so I mean, and they're older too.
We could have a whole we could have a whole series on how you can screw your kids up as a parent, right? Like everyone does. It's just like Anyway, you hope that they learn those lessons or are able to skip over those lessons, but also everyone's their own person, so they have to learn their own lessons their own way, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. So you've got all this stuff, you're getting into internships and other things. So let's talk about supply chain security specifically. Like, how did you get into that? We know that you're working with SemGrep now, obviously a super, innovative company. We've been singing their praises for a long time, but what brought you to software supply chain security?
Yeah, really almost entirely by chance.
Mhm.
Most of my experience is on the offensive security side, doing penetration testing, also some incident response work, general controls, audit
Mhm.
work as a consultant. And I knew I wanted to get into application security. So I just finished my master's in comp sci through Georgia Tech's online program in December. But while I was midway through that, a Slack channel, a Slack community I'm in, they posted about an entry level position at SemGrip as a CV analyst, where you would basically be reviewing application security vulnerabilities and writing SemGrip supply chain rules.
Okay.
So those are rules that help you detect the usage of a vulnerable dependency in your application. And so I figured, it's entry level, but maybe this would be perfect to do while working as a consultant, like as a kind of a part-time gig, because it was a contractor role initially. And just from day one, I was super stoked to be working at like a startup. First off, my expectations of startups was totally skewed from all the TV shows and whatnot. They do have beanbag chairs and a ping pong table, but like I
Wait, wait,
thought
wait,
people
wait, wait, wait. It's not all like Silicon Valley, because that's
apparently.
like, yeah, apparently. Okay, got it.
So yeah, I've just been enjoying it since day one. The people are incredibly smart. I think that's what keeps me most excited. Is just there's, like I mentioned, learning from other people's mistakes, but also their lessons, the lessons that they've learned along the way. So being able to question them for their experience and learn from their experience is just super invaluable to me. Um, and then software supply chain specifically, that was just the product that I was brought on board to support.
Mhm.
But I very quickly recognized that it is an absolute dumpster fire. I've quoted saying that several times, so I'm not afraid to say it again. It's just, it took me like a year and a half to even be able to confidently say what the definition of software supply chain is. And still today, if you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different definitions. So,
What's your current definition?
Yeah, there you go. So what's your current
oh,
definition? We're going to put that
putting me on
on
the
the
spot.
on yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
So the way that I look at it is specifically vulnerabilities and integrity for software dependencies. So some people might say, a vendor that provides software is a part of the software supply chain. I want to specifically look at the code. So I don't care about the who owns the code. I do care about what they're doing with the code. For example, like, are they doing SAST? Are they doing for a dependency? Because all the same AppSec practices also apply to all the dependencies that you're using, which means that you kind of need to evaluate the effectiveness of an AppSec program for thousands, if not potentially hundreds of thousands of different organizations, which are just oftentimes open source maintainers. Um, and that's the scary piece to me. But if you look up like top 10 supply chain incidents, you'll get tons of people. It was just like a vendor breach through phishing, and they replaced the binary. So it's
Mhm.
interesting.
That's interesting analysis, because I'm thinking back to some of my days as like being a like a software like security architect for a company, like a financial company. And one of the things that we were trying to do was introduce this idea of like, oh, there's risk when it comes to any of the software packages that the developers are using, right? So at the time, of course, right, like, the only thing we had was a hammer at that, from a tool perspective. And I didn't want to analyze code. So it was like, oh, well, why don't we just run all this open source, like, third party dependencies? Why don't we just run that all through Fortify, right? Why don't we just scan it and see what pops up, and at least give like a risk analysis on it? It wasn't like we're going to go out and fix anything, but we're going to give a risk analysis on whether or not developers can actually use it. And it was somewhat effective, right? But it was also like introducing so much friction into that process that I don't know how much they actually maintained it after I left, because it just is right? Like number one, it's Fortify. So scanning anything is, good luck, right? Number two, you start to support things that are outside of its scope, or, like developers have to use this specific package because of X, Y, and Z, or they're using whatever like library that depends upon that dependency, right? Anyway, like it's a difficult proposition. So, I mean, that's kind of what you're looking at, though, correct? Is that level of analysis?
So with SemGrep right now, what we specifically, I guess our like specialty is reachability analysis. And so we use the
Mhm.
SemGrep engine, which does static code
Yeah.
analysis, to look at just your code right now. There are some competitors out there that are doing a simpler analysis or reachability analysis through, for example, call graph analysis, where they
Yeah.
can then look at also transitive dependencies. So they create a call graph for not just your application, but also all the dependencies used by your application. And then they determine, is it statically reachable? The vulnerable function, is it statically reachable? The reason why we prefer the static analysis route using the SemGrep engine is we can also do data flow reachability. So now we can say, you're calling the vulnerable function, but you're also calling it with this specific parameter, which makes it more likely to be exploitable. It's really important to note that reachability doesn't equal exploitability. It actually means very far from that, more often than not. But using the SemGrep engine, we're getting a little closer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for reachability, so help me understand that too. So reachability is more about the paths within the application versus like whether or not that those paths and how they're invoked are actually exploitable. Is there that's those are those separate in the way you're looking at it or thinking about it?
So reachability is basically I believe it's a little over 250,000 CVEs in the world. And then if you look at GitHub security advisories specifically for open source project vulnerabilities, there's around 17,000 reviewed advisories. And so if you just look at the package version and say, hey, you're using this vulnerable package version, that means you're vulnerable. You're going to have thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities in your project, most likely. So with reachability, this was actually my first job at SemGrep, reviewing those advisories, reverse engineering the patch or the advisory information and saying, you're only vulnerable if you call this specific function from the package and use it in this specific way. Mm-hmm. So then we write a SemGrep rule to identify that in your code.
Mm-hmm. Wait, yeah, okay. So yeah, you're reducing false positives at that point, right? I mean, because that's the biggest complaint that I have from customers, from people that I work with is, okay, yeah, we've got SCA tools that pop this up and tell me that I've got critical vulnerabilities in 90% of my code, and a lot of this analysis I have to run by myself, right? Like, and I'm showing the article here or the blog post. From some SemGrep that you put together on reachability analysis, just from a, just to help out with the discussion here.
Yeah. We gave also like there some time back we did on the podcast we did a deeper dive on this specific article by Doyensec. And it kind of it had evaluated SemGrep, it evaluated Sneak, it evaluated Dependabot. Here's the article. Basically, SemGrep performed incredibly well. It was the one that that seemed to stand out. So in terms of true positives in their tests, SemGrep had 10. So the breakdown was for Dependabot, it was 13 true positives, 97 false positives. SemGrep, 10 true positives. SemGrep, 10 true positives, 2 false positives. 2. For contrast, Sneak and Dependabot had 77 and 97 false positives, right? So it scored 2 true positives above Sneak and 3 below Dependabot. I think that's a pretty good. Now, there were some things we were kind of curious about with the test and what was skewed and whatnot, but overall, with taking a far more targeted approach, it seemed like SemGrep was leading the pack there by I mean, those stats are pretty great.
Yeah. So something
And
to
that is
note
the
with
one thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so something to note with the true positives there, they had only evaluated our reachability rules. So we actually have parity with Dependabot. So those 3 true positives that we missed that Dependabot had, we actually did have a what we referred to as an upgrade only rule. So we would have detected it and flagged it as a vulnerability, but it would have been a lower priority in our dashboard.
Yeah, I mean that's great. Honestly, even if none of that was true, the thing I'm hearing from everybody, and so like my company, we don't yet do anything in that space, and don't in the short term have any plans to do anything like that. But that is a question we get, and then we ask, okay, so what's going on with your SCA vendors? And that like their thing is the noise, right? So like even if you had not mentioned anything about those 3 true positives, I don't think anybody would have cared, like truthfully, because the 77 and 97 false positives versus I mean, I just had it up, but I can't even remember. It was so small
Yeah.
for false positives. I think 2 or something, like there was nothing, right? So it's like, yeah, okay, well, that's what people want. I can tell you because they're telling me that's what they want. They don't want a lot of noise. They're
Well,
okay
yeah,
with missing a few things.
yeah, it's the actionable results, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's being able to trust what's coming out, and having a false negative when it induces is almost better than having a false positive, because I don't have to spend as much time on it. Yes, like, yeah, signal to noise ratio of 10 to 77 versus 10 to 2 um, is worlds apart, right? Like, and that's what makes me excited about the reachability analysis, um, is just that ability to flip that switch. Because that again, that's what I struggled with at that the previously company that I mentioned. Is we're scanning with Fortify, we're finding all these things. We're telling developers they can't use this product or this dependency because we're finding stuff, but I don't know how valid this stuff actually is, or these security issues are. Um, how much time was it taking you to do this sort of reachability analysis, though? I kind of want to dig into that a little bit, right? Because it feels like a very manual process, and you did speak to like automating things. So like give us a little bit of flavor on how long it would take you to do this analysis, how long it would take you to build the rule, like what results you were seeing there.
Yeah, it's not out yet, but the researchers on the supply chain team have put together a blog post actually detailing uh, our workflow at a high level on how we're writing the rules. So that'll be released sometime in the near future. But basically, without the automation, up until recently, we were writing rules just like anybody else would in YAML, mostly using the SimGrep playground. We did have a template generation where we could enter in the CVE, and it would ingest uh, advisory details from GitHub Security Advisory or NVD, and then it would insert it into metadata fields for the SimGrep rule. Something to note, by the way, is SimGrep rules are fully transparent. So if you are in the SimGrep app and you get a supply chain finding, you can actually see the SimGrep rule, exactly how it's written. Now we're writing it in JSONet, which is making it more opportunistic to automate more of the things. Just because JSON is we're ingesting a lot of the advisory information from JSON. So the OSV schema is probably the most popular. It's also what GitHub security advisories use. And so we're able to ingest that data and use some pretty basic JSONet functions to help automate the rule writing that way.
Cool. Yeah, it's always that's always the question, right? Because the more you get into like the custom rule stuff with SemGrep, right? Like the more effective that you can make it from an internal perspective, right? Like not even necessarily what you guys are doing on like a wider aspect, but a lot of companies don't necessarily use SemGrep to the power that they could. So understanding that sort of like this is what it takes to implement a rule to search for a specific CVE or a specific concern that I have is good flavor to have. That's all. That's all I was driving at there.
Yeah, I mean, some languages are a lot easier than others. For example, in Python, semgrep is you could give it a fully qualified function name. You just give it the full path, and semgrep will find it regardless of how it's written, if it's using an alias, etc. But for example, JavaScript, which is the nightmare import statement, I legitimately have nightmares about how many ways there are to import packages in JavaScript. We're just,
and you're not kidding. I just so you know, Seth knows this, and not a lot of other people know this, but I spent, I don't know, a few months going down many rabbit holes with JavaScript and TypeScript to build a really performant in-memory scanner, essentially. Anyways, why I'm saying this is, oh my God, it is the worst. It is the worst for all the different ways you can define. And then you've got forget even the headache of JavaScript versus TypeScript and all the different ways that gets messy. But then just JavaScript itself is just a nightmare. It's almost, you see, it's too flexible, and you see so many different patterns, to your point about like the way things are defined and structured. And it's just, I'm with you, brother. JavaScript sucks for that. Anyways.
Yes. I guess something I'm curious to get your guys' opinion on. It's not really into the weeds at all, but just on a high level. So software supply chain, we're kind of reusing all the same foundational work that has been used for vulnerability management before supply chain, before people cared about open source dependencies, things like that. So if you look at like a CVE, for example, if there is a CVE in a dependency and there's 10 projects that use that CVE with the known vulnerable version, and they use it in a vulnerable way, is that one CVE or 11 CVEs?
That's not 11 CVEs, not in my mind.
Yeah.
So that's a fair response. The CNA guidelines are, in my opinion, very contradictory. There's one that specifically says if one code fix can remediate the vulnerability, then it should be one CVE. But you can definitely argue that you can make that one code fix in 11 different projects and remediate the vulnerability. There are many situations where one CVE has led to dozens of CVEs. So that there's a VM2 package that was deprecated and has critical vulnerabilities, and there's several CVEs for several different projects.
Which are related.
Yeah.
Well, and then you've almost got that. You've got the issue there too, right? Like it's not only if it's a primary dependency, yes, right? But then it's a secondary dependency, so it's a package of it's a dependency of a package, or tertiary, right? As you get so in depth on some of those, I can see it popping up in multiple different ways, right? Especially if from a dynamic perspective, I'm thinking about bug bounty researchers, right? They're coming in, they find that, hey, I can do SQL injection on this website, right? On this, specific web service, whatever it is. And it's because of a dependency or a sub-dependency, right? I'm going to report it to the primary owner of that site, and they're going to have to go fix it. Now, if that's an open source project, they go and they update that specific, library. They can also issue a CVE at that point, right? To the CNA saying, hey, we fixed this vulnerability, but they didn't really fix the vulnerability. All they did was update the package. So I get what you're saying, because we've got this confusion there based on, where does the vulnerability actually lie and what is the responsibility of that? It's almost like we need a software supply chain vulnerability tracker as opposed to the CVE system. That's almost a subsidiary of that in order to, we've already got CVE creep, right? So much all over the place. And
something to maybe harp on in your example. So if there's think of your application and all of the supply chain vulnerabilities that may have popped up. And then during the triage, and as reachability kind of proves, most of them are false positives. The same applies to your dependencies. So your dependency that is using, this is kind of the start of my argument against transitive dependencies, which I did a 5-part meme series on LinkedIn and have been ranting about constantly. So my argument is that if you're trusting an open source maintainer enough to insert their code into your project, you also need to trust them enough to issue a security advisory if they're using a vulnerable dependency in a vulnerable way. So that I know it's a lot of responsibility and trust, but are you going to hire a team of application security engineers to triage countless transitive dependencies and packages? And even if you do, are they going to take the time to make the PR to update the package if there's an update available? And then if there isn't, what do you do? Like, are you just going to replace the package and do all the work to refactor your code? So,
yeah, I mean, it's at some level, it's the cost becomes unsustainable, right? Most startups, they can't do that, but then they have, I mean, even not like, okay, leave startups, whatever, a company that I'm working with that's been around for 25, 30 years, right? Like they've got all of this tech debt, they're using all of these dependencies, and then they get beat up by an overzealous client security team. Like one of their clients comes in and is like, oh, well, it looks like you're using this dependency. They don't do any reachability analysis or anything like that, but they have a policy that they will not engage a vendor that has not updated their packages, but they're still using the devices that were rolled out 10, 12 years ago, that were sold using an old version of Linux, whatever it is, right? Like there's so many conditions to that the cost of doing just upgrades on that single instance of the product, when there's not necessarily a support staff that's available to it, when there's no upgrade path, when they're using the client or that, so the customer's client is using an old version that is no longer supported but wants it to be supported, right? Like I spin out, because I'm like, what do you do in that situation, right? Like you tell them to throw it away and buy the latest instance, but they don't want to hear that either, right? So it's this battle that you have with overzealous security teams at that point, in understanding the level of complexity that goes into the dependencies, right? And whether or not it's actually vulnerable.
Speaking with engineers and most of SemGrip direct customers, it's so easy for them to grasp pretty much what I'm preaching here. It's being able to solve high priority findings is a lot more valuable to us than analysis paralysis, where we just have endless false positives. But to your point, I'll refer to them as transitive customers. So our customers who get the SBOM or get the vulnerability report, and they don't care because they don't maybe understand, or it's just a policy thing, or they're auditors or regulators, whatever it might be. They need an answer for transitive vulnerabilities, which there isn't a reasonable one. There's nothing we can currently do. And I think a lot of it comes down to us using legacy vulnerability management solutions that weren't intended for software supply chain security. So now people are looking at EPSS, the exploit probability prediction score or something like that. Basically, they tell you what is the likelihood of this vulnerability being exploited in the next 30 days. Well, that doesn't look at environmental factors at all. So it can have a 100% EPSS score, but if it's 10 layers deep in the dependency chain and it's never even being executed at runtime, it can't ever get exploited. So that kind of debunks EPSS in software supply chain right there. And there's Contrast Security who does runtime SCA, and they've shown that on an average project, up to 62% of dependencies never get run. So just think of all the vulnerabilities that are remediated just because they're never executed.
Yeah, that's a great stat. I need to find that sometime and use it.
Just think of it. Think how often you do pip install or npm install, whatever it is, and think how many times you've done uninstall. I don't think I ever do, especially if it's a matured project. Like I'm not going to go around uninstalling packages that I don't know where else they're being used.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, if you don't know. I was gonna say I do uninstall, but more so because I'm in complete control of whatever that I'm working on, and it's like, trying to make sure that like if you put a new project online, you want to make sure that it's only using dependencies it has to use. But yeah, for the
Mhm.
most part, you're right. Like who's uninstalling in a production PR sense or in a production workflow sense?
Yeah,
Probably not often.
Well,
you got to think.
I mean, yeah, especially when there's money coming in from that project, right? Like the business is not going to want you to go in and do like a pip uninstall on something that's making money on a daily basis. Um, yeah. Sorry, Kyle. What were you going to say there?
No, I was just going to say, so software supply chain is mostly a tech debt problem
Mhm.
because if you are looking in CI/CD for supply chain vulnerabilities, that means you're likely installing a non-latest version of a package because I think it was Sonatype had a report where 96% of the Maven vulnerabilities that they assessed already had a patched version available. And so right there, like that kind of disproves the whole random dude in Nebraska isn't pulling his weight. Like, they
Yeah.
are.
I'm trying to understand in terms of the mechanics behind building a call graph, not the actual graph itself, obviously, but the mechanics of building it, where you know where things are laid out, what functions are and where called where by where, um, and I'm trying to understand. So, and I know like with SemGrep, it's doing it is doing AST parsing, and then using pattern matching against the parsed AST. Um, to surface whatever pattern, whatever rule you've written, which is a pattern, matches that pattern and surface anything that so what I'm trying to reconcile, because it's been on my mind ever since you said it, or since I read it in your article where it says the difference between uh, in terms of understanding reachability, the the pros and cons between the SemGrep approach to versus the call graph approach. And I'm saying this because in theory, I would think, right, they would be reasonably the same thing in terms of um, efficacy. I would think, right, as a layman to SCA reachability analysis. So I don't know if there any insight you can provide to even at a very high level to say, hey, this is why this is more effective than this other thing, you know.
Yeah, it's a new initiative, but we're trying to coin the term data flow reachability to kind of say like we're doing data flow analysis. We can look at sources and sinks and say, this tainted source or whatever it is has reached a vulnerable function, as opposed to just saying the vulnerable function was called. It's a work in progress. We had some good customer feedback. Pretty much everybody said, "Oh, we had no idea you guys did it differently." So that's maybe good signal for why this is needed. Um, and to your point, reachability is similar to my complaint about software supply chain definitions. Reachability, I mean, there's vendors out there that are doing reachability by class. So if you call a vulnerable class, not the function, there's some that are doing reachability in like a cloud security posture management solution, saying it's reachable if it's on an externally facing application. There's some that say it's reachable just if it's a direct dependency, it's automatically reachable. And they're all using the same damn term, and it confuses everybody.
Yeah, I mean, so in the first example, like they're saying that literally because the application's facing externally of the organization, not an internal app for the organization, then it becomes potentially reachable versus, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to categorize. That's a really, and the thing is, like, I would think, right, with a call graph, I could look at your package file, say, okay, well, this matches the version of the thing that I'm looking for that might be vulnerable. Okay, cool. Now let's see, like, where is it called within the application? But it doesn't. I guess what you're saying is it doesn't take into account how it's called. Is what it sounds like, anyways. Like, to your point, you're writing rules that say, okay, well, is it taking I don't know, we'll just make something up. Is it taking an integer style parameter in the first parameter and string in the second? And if it is, like, then it's vulnerable. And also, furthermore, I don't know, like maybe user input has to be involved in some step along here. So basically we're writing a rule that says it's got to have this composition, take these parameters, and whatever else qualifiers are there. Whereas with a call graph, conceptually, again, it's just saying that from these places, this class or this function is being called, but it's maybe not doing a breakdown. And I wonder why not a breakdown of how it's structured. If you already have the information, if you've already built a call graph, it's kind of weird to not take that extra step, right? I mean, I'm taking a step back. Maybe I'm just like off my rocker here, but like, does this sound like I'm saying anything, Seth, that makes sense? Because conceptually, it just seems like it wouldn't be that hard to add, that functionality in.
Like the data flow analysis that Kyle's talking about.
Yeah, DFD style kind of analysis. Yeah, or DF.
I mean, I think part of what you're struggling with there, Ken, is that that's the analysis that you would do on anything, right? Like we're doing a secure code review or whatever it is. We're building out a DFD analysis of what's going in and whether or not a vulnerability is actually exploitable based upon certain conditions. And that's what Kyle and SemGrep are trying to replicate with the dependencies as well, right? Is that, so that,
but
I think that
what
that
I'm
all
trying to
makes
understand
sense.
is if you go through the process of building a call graph, right, for your static analysis tool, why not take that extra step is the part that's confusing me.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Kyle, do you have an answer to that? Like, why wouldn't?
Sorry, guys.
I mean, obviously,
I know
you're
it's like
doing
off the wall. I don't mean to put you on the spot on that because it's me pontificating, but it does seem kind of silly to not see it all the way through. But maybe it's a product. Who knows?
Maybe it's.
I don't know. What are your thoughts, Kyle?
Yeah. I never really thought about it. I'm far from a PA expert. I'm just stuck in my supply chain space and happy to be there. But I think speed is probably a big factor. Even these solutions that are doing call graph analysis tend to be significantly slower than SemGrep, especially if they're trying to do transitive reachability, because they're basically doing dependency resolution for potentially thousands of packages and have to generate the call graph for each of them. Hopefully most of them are cached, so it might be pretty quick, but it's still a lot of API calls and a lot of time consumed. One in particular, recently a potential customer just said that the competing solution that's doing call graph analysis with transitive reachability was entirely unusable in CI/CD. They said, yeah, it would be great for daily scans, and we actually liked the direction they're heading more than SemGrep, but it's just unusable. So it was a pretty easy choice.
That's a fair point. That makes a lot of sense. Speed is the number one. I mean, two things. It's always speed and false positives. Right? Like those are the two things always. So that actually makes a lot of sense. Because I'm sitting over here racking brain, like, if you're going through all this work, why don't you just finish out the thing and make it good? Like,
so that's probably what they're doing. But yeah, you think about the size of what you were trying to do with JavaScript, Ken, right? Like building out a huge graph, right? Like you've created this graph, but with the dependencies, you've got a node application that has 100 direct dependencies, 500 or exponential number of transitive dependencies, maintaining that in memory and then tracing every single one of those paths to identify it. Oof, right? Like it just like I'm thinking about the amount of time. Yes, it is a problem that can be accomplished, but we flip it and use the SemGrep idea of like, okay, we're only identifying those specific patterns that we're interested in, and that's a lot. Like that can be done in a significantly less amount of time and quickly enough that I can actually move on and report something that is useful, right? Like, and this goes back, like, not to like spin too much out of it, but this goes back to the idea that I had with like Sputter back in the day, right? Like of, hey, we're interested in very specific patterns of exploitability and reachability. Like, let's only test for that. It doesn't matter how deep it can go because we're going to go in and fix it no matter what, right? Like, so if Kyle and his team identify that, hey, there is reachability for this specific package that's exploitable, we're going to raise that and go fix it rather than figure out every single way that it can be analyzed and done. And right. I just like, we spend a lot of time in security looking at everything and trying to find all of the nuanced ways of like the way that the cross-site scripting is effective or like can be bypassed and yada, 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 when we should be focused more on the actual exploitability and fixability of things. So.
There's also the other side of the coin for speed is the actual rule writing. So we have an internal team of security researchers writing all these rules. Depend about they in GitHub security advisories, they have an affected functions field. So right there, it gives you roughly 600 CVEs that you can quickly write a call graph analysis rule for, because all you need is the fully qualified function name. Whereas with SemGrep, we're actually taking the time to research every single advisory that we support. And we look to see, sure, maybe the advisory says this function is vulnerable, but we don't take it at what it face value. We're going to take a look at the PR and say, oh, actually, it's only vulnerable if it's called in this way. Whereas,
I see. So you're actually digging in on the code changes when possible, I assume.
Yeah.
So nice. Well, that's awesome.
I kind of, as far as like if I was a consumer and needed reachability, I would much prefer SemGreps. If I were to create a supply chain product, I would much prefer a call graph, just because it's so much more efficient to write rules and scale. But
yeah, interesting.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, I think we could go on for a long time, right? We have reached our hour, Kyle. This is what always happens.
I know,
us. Like,
dude. I know we could, because as soon as you brought up that, I don't know. I'd been quiet for a while because sorry, Steph. I know you're about to go into the spiel, but I just like to wrap it up stuff. But the thing is, as soon as you said, you made mention of, all right, I've got 11 immediate packages I've included in my application, and this is going to sit with me. By the way, this is really something interesting. I've got, let's say, 11 packages in my application, or regardless, there's 11 dependencies, whatever, 11 dependencies that rely on this one dependency that's vulnerable. If I update, if this vulnerability gets fixed over here in this one-off package, and I've updated, or I have to update these 11, otherwise then they themselves now have a CVE applied to them. That one little scenario just branched off into like a million little pathways of thoughts, just so you know. And I feel like that's going to become something that Seth and I talk more about now. For what it's worth, you left a really interesting little nugget of thought there. Sorry guys, but have to bring this up because it's very interesting. I sat there in deep thought while you guys were talking for a while over this.
Yeah. Pretty much any marketing in the supply chain space is likely tied to a legacy vulnerability management solution. And there's always edge cases that just don't work for supply chain. Kev, known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, pretty much entirely commercial products. So sure, your SCA solution might label Kev vulnerabilities, but how valuable is that to a consumer when they don't see any of them, because, well, there's very few that exist.
Yeah. Well, and so Ron actually commented on the article too. Ron Paris jumped in. He's like, so if I'm using the package HiDash and its associated function merge high, which is just a wrapper around Lodash's merge deep, which is vulnerable, and I'm calling merge high with attacker controlled parameters, would SemGrep flag it as vulnerable or no, because Lodash and merge deep are transitive? I think he's asking specifics around SemGrep and what the current flagging looks like.
Yeah. So if
that
makes
sense to you. Yeah,
I'm going to post it too, so you don't have to try and remember all that. In this channel, and it'll become on the screen here, or it'll be on the screen here in a moment. So if I'm using the package HiDash and its associated function merge high, which is just a wraparound Lodash's merge deep, which is vulnerable. So Lodash's merge deep is vulnerable, and I'm calling merge high with attacker controlled parameters. SemGrep flag it as vulnerable or no, because Lodash and merge deep are transitive.
Yeah, and this is sadly something. The Lodash and merge deep vulnerabilities I sadly have too much experience with, because this actually happens, or actually did happen. And so we would have to, for reachability to work, we would have to have written a rule for the high dash package. So just writing it for low dash wouldn't be enough to catch it because we don't support transitive reachability. That article that I mentioned earlier is kind of our argument for why we're not prioritizing transitive reachability right now. It is something we're actively talking about and something that we hope as the engine improves and just kind of the industry kind of sorts out some of these issues that it'll become more of a priority. But we just feel like there's better work that can be done in the meantime. And it's also not too bad to have to write a duplicate rule every now and then. So we can see the dependencies that customers are using. We can see where most of the noise comes from, and we're able to prioritize our rule writing based on that.
Cool.
And so if we see a lot of customers using high dash, we'll make a high dash rule.
Cool. I mean, that's a good approach, right? Like, you kind of take it with a grain of salt and where we're currently at in the, as an industry goes, right? Like, I'm not sure if there's a solution right now with the current state of CNAs and CVEs and everything else, but outside of, I always go back to, if it's possible, just go fix it, right? Like that's what I tell developers, because and it's usually the easiest solution. We could argue for months on whether or not we actually need to do it, but if we can solve it in 5 to 10 minutes, let's just go solve it and move on.
Yeah, it is worth noting we would flag the transitive vulnerability, just not with reachability. So
okay, cool. Well, Kyle, we want to be cognizant of your time. I don't want to, take up your whole day with this, right? Like as much as we would probably love to just sit here and talk about it for a long time. We appreciate you coming on. Where can people reach out to you, or where can they get in contact with you if they have more questions about, SemGrep's reachability analysis or anything else?
Yeah, so Crime Hacks, obviously, for weekly software supply chain security content. LinkedIn, I have been labeled by my significant other as a linked influencer. So that's where I post my shenanigans, also actively monitor DMs and things like that. But if you want to email me, Kyle@crimehacks.com would be best.
Sweet. Okay. Well, yeah, we will promote it. We appreciate your time, you coming on. And as things progress, let us know how it goes, because we'd love to have further discussions along this, in the future on, obviously it's a topic of interest for our listeners and for Ken and I. So Ken, anything else before we close out for today?
No, I appreciate your time and allowing me to ask you random, and other people to ask you random questions about your work and supply chain security. And SCA is a pretty big topic these days. I hear about it literally every week, mostly multiple times a week. So thanks. Yeah, just thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. Cool. Sorry. Well, actually, there is one last thing. For your X handle, it is I just had it up. Sorry, it is circles we run 42.
Yep, that's the one.
We run 42. All right. Putting that in so everybody can find you on the social medias. And then you mentioned being on LinkedIn as well. So Kyle Kelly is also on LinkedIn and posting interesting content. I was just being nosy on your profile and checking it out. So
sweet.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks again, Kyle. And we'll see everyone next week.
Great. Thanks all.